My cheating wife cried when she saw the cruel message I sent while she was with her lover. Desperation took over her at the exact moment her eyes met her cell phone screen. I knew something was wrong, I had known for weeks. The forced smiles, the frequent departures, the smell of a perfume that wasn't hers. The betrayal did not reveal itself immediately, but when it finally did, the impact was brutal, almost lethal. That message was my last attempt to rescue a piece of my dignity, to shout to the world that I knew. I knew everything. She, the woman who promised to be my partner, my lover, my companion until the end of our days, was now sitting next to another man, seeking refuge in arms that were not mine. And I, helplessly, watched from afar. The message sent was not just cruel, it was a sentence. She needed to understand the depth of my pain, the poison that coursed through my veins every time I imagined her hands touching another body. And in that moment, when she read those words, her whole world came crashing down. I know everything, that's what I wrote. And those words, simple and direct, ripped the silence between us like a sharp blade. There was no denying it, no explaining it. She knew that I knew, and what destroyed her was not just the discovery of the betrayal, but the fear of what would come next. The tears that began to stream down his face were not of regret, they were desperate. She knew I was capable of anything now. I couldn't pretend anymore. The months of distrust ate away at my sanity. What was once love was now hate. Every smile she gave me in the last few weeks felt like a lie, every touch an insult. I loved her, but I also hated her with an intensity one never thought possible. She did this to me. She chose another man, and now she would pay the price. Her phone vibrated once again. He knew the pressure of the truth was crushing his mind. I won't wait for you at home, I wrote. I've already taken care of everything. The words were cryptic, purposefully vague. I wanted her to feel the panic, the uncertainty, the fear of what I might be doing. She had no idea what I had done. Little did she know that the worst was yet to come. While she sobbed in a corner, desperately trying to compose herself in front of her lover, I was somewhere else, with a carefully devised plan. The humiliation I suffered needed to be paid in kind. I knew that just a text message wasn't enough. No, she needed something bigger, something that would burn her reputation, something that would leave deep scars, both on her and on the man she had chosen to cheat with. So, with a few clicks, I started destroying everything she valued most, her image, her life. And in that moment, as she cried and tried desperately to regain control, she had no idea that true revenge was already in motion, a revenge that would echo beyond both of us. At first, everything seemed perfect for Daniel and Melissa. They met during college, when they both still carried naive dreams of careers and love, and from their first meeting, the connection was instant. Daniel was a practical man, with a sarcastic humor, but with an undeniable kindness that enchanted her. Melissa, on the other hand, was more emotional, someone who lived each moment intensely, with a sensitivity that balanced his more restrained personality. After years of hard work, they finally settled into a comfortable home on the outskirts of Philadelphia. Daniel, a civil engineer, spent his days managing projects, always focused on what he considered his role in the relationship, the provider. He believed his responsibility was to ensure safety and stability for Melissa and the future they dreamed of together. He didn't worry too much about the day-to-day details, how the relationship looked to others, because, for him, the foundations were firm. And there was no doubt about the love he felt for her. Melissa, on the other hand, has always had a freer spirit. She worked as an art consultant, a profession that allowed her to be creative and, at the same time, sociable. She had a wide circle of friends and acquaintances, many of whom admired her natural elegance and the welcoming way in which she treated everyone. Although she was satisfied with the life she had built with Daniel, sometimes she felt that something was missing, a restlessness that she couldn't explain. Their marriage flowed in a predictable but stable manner. Together, they enjoyed moments of calm after long days of work. Dinners in the living room, conversations about future plans, occasional laughter when watching a series, the little routines that, in a way, seemed to represent the solid love they shared. However, over time, these moments began to be accompanied by long silences, as if words were no longer enough to express what they both really felt. Daniel often wondered if those silent pauses during dinner were normal, part of everyday tiredness. He imagined that maybe they were just going through a phase like any couple. He wasn't the kind of man who handled deep emotions well. I preferred to believe that the small discomforts would resolve themselves with time. This is how life is, he thought. Not everything can be perfect all the time. Melissa, on the other hand, felt differently. She didn't just want stability. He wanted a deeper emotional connection, something that, over the years, seemed to have diminished between them. She didn't blame Daniel. He was a good man, always had been. But conversations that were once full of dreams and plans now seemed routine, almost mechanical. The passion of before had given way to the comfort of routine, and this worried her. She didn't know how to tell him she needed more, and part of her felt guilty for thinking that way. On nights when Melissa arrived late from work, Daniel would often stay in the home office, finishing a project or just aimlessly browsing the internet. It was a relief not to have to face long silences at the dinner table. He loved Melissa, but he had grown accustomed to a quieter, almost unnoticeable kind of love. For him, the fact that they were together was proof enough that things were fine. "We're here, together. That's what matters," he told himself. Despite this, Daniel was not insensitive to her needs. He noticed when Melissa was distant, but always chalked it up to work stress. When she spent more time away from home, he believed it was normal. She had always been a very sociable woman, unlike him, who preferred the comforts of home. Deep down, he knew that maybe he should worry more, but he preferred not to think about it. "Everything will be resolved," was what he repeated silently. Melissa, in turn, found solace in her activities outside the home. Outings with friends, art events, anything that brought back some of the excitement she felt she had lost over the years. It wasn't an emotion Daniel could give her, at least, not anymore. The weight of these emotions bothered her, and she tried to drown them in new hobbies, new places. Deep down, what Melissa wanted most was to feel those butterflies in her stomach again, the same ones she felt at the beginning of the relationship. The days passed, and the small cracks in the relationship became more visible, although neither of them had the courage to confront them directly. Daniel believed that as long as he kept the wheels of his life turning, work, finances, the house in order, everything would go well. And for him, that was love, the ability to keep everything going, to make silent sacrifices. He didn't know that for Melissa, this kind of love was insufficient. She, in turn, began to wonder to what extent she was willing to continue this routine. There was an emptiness inside her that only increased every day, and despite loving Daniel, she felt like something vital was missing. At times, she thought about talking to him, about putting everything on the table, but the fear of destroying what they had stopped her. It was as if she was caught between the security of what she knew and the desire for something more. The tension between them was subtle, almost imperceptible. Friends and family didn't notice, because the couple still maintained appearances and continued to be seen as an example of stability. But within the four walls of their home, Melissa and Daniel lived different realities. He, immersed in the belief that everything was in control, and she, struggling to find a greater meaning in what they lived. The nights became longer, the silences heavier. Even when they were together, there seemed to be a growing gulf between them, a distance that words couldn't bridge. Daniel knew something was changing, but he didn't want to acknowledge it. Melissa knew she needed to do something, but she didn't know where to start. And so, day after day, the marriage dragged on, silently, towards something neither of them could yet predict. As the months passed, the tension between Daniel and Melissa became almost palpable, although neither of them mentioned it directly. The daily routine continued as usual, but something fundamental had changed. Daniel would arrive home, tired, and find Melissa with a distant look in her eyes, different from the glow he had once known so well. She smiled at him, but the smile seemed vague, almost automatic. There was a feeling that something was out of place, something Daniel couldn't quite put his finger on. He tried to rationalize. She thought that maybe work was taking more out of her than normal, or that phase was just a reflection of years together, a familiarity that, at times, was confused with monotony. But even though he knew something was wrong, he didn't do anything to change the situation. Maybe out of fear of facing the truth. Or maybe because, on some level, I preferred to ignore how I felt and cling to the idea that everything would go back to normal. In turn, Melissa felt more divided every day. The conversations that had once comforted her with Daniel now seemed devoid of emotion, as if he were no longer truly present. He loved her, she knew that, but the love Daniel offered seemed insufficient to satisfy the desire that was growing inside her, a desire for something more intense, more vibrant. When going out to events and meeting friends, Melissa found small moments of relief, but they were fleeting. It was in one of these meetings that everything changed. Melissa met someone who seemed to bring back the energy she felt she had lost. He was charming, engaging, and made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. In the first few casual encounters, she denied to herself what was happening. She told herself that it was nothing more than a friendship, a temporary connection, and that she would never let it interfere with her marriage. But, little by little, that relationship gained an unexpected intensity. What was once an exchange of looks and smiles became something more. They began exchanging messages, long conversations about art, life and what they both missed in their own relationships. Daniel, on the other hand, felt that Melissa was increasingly absent, but he didn't know how to approach the issue. He wanted to believe that everything was fine, but the distance between them grew every day. At home, the atmosphere became increasingly heavy. The conversations, once fluid, were now replaced by uncomfortable silences, as if both were waiting for the other to say something that would bring them back to the way they were before. But nothing was said. Nothing changed. Melissa spent more time outside the house, and Daniel, stuck in his routine, tried not to care. He immersed himself in his work, believing that time would correct whatever problem existed between them. But inside him, something was beginning to break. The constant discomfort he felt, the feeling that there was something he couldn't see, all of it was eating him up inside. Until, one night, Daniel began to notice signs that he could no longer ignore. Small details that had gone unnoticed for a long time now seemed to scream in his face. Melissa spent more time on her cell phone, her laughter muffled as she answered messages, her furtive glances when he entered the room. And then, something finally clicked. It was no longer a matter of vague distrust, it was certain. Certainty that something was happening and that he needed to find out what it was. He didn't mention anything to Melissa. Instead, he began to observe more closely. He was waiting for the right moment, the moment when she would finally make a mistake, leave a clue. And that's what happened. One night, while Melissa was taking a shower, Daniel heard her cell phone vibrate insistently. Curiosity, mixed with a deep feeling of imminent betrayal, made him pick up the device. He hesitated for a moment, but the need to know the truth spoke louder. The cell phone screen revealed what he feared, a series of messages from an unknown number, with a content that left no doubt about what was happening. His heart sped up. He felt the ground crumble beneath his feet, the feeling of having been tricked burning in his chest. The messages revealed not just an emotional closeness, but something much deeper. Melissa had crossed the line. The relationship, which until then he thought was only fragile, was irreparably broken. The betrayal he feared was real. Daniel, still holding his cell phone, heard the sound of the shower water stopping. Melissa was coming out of the bathroom. He quickly put the device back in place, trying to hide the shock that now dominated his thoughts. His heart was beating fast, and he knew that, from now on, nothing would be the same. When she came out of the bathroom, smiling as if nothing had happened, Daniel looked at her in a way she didn't recognize. He knew. And she, even though she wasn't sure what he knew, felt a chill run up her spine. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. The words exchanged between Melissa and the other man echoed in his mind, over and over again, like a nightmare he couldn't shake. The betrayal, which until then was a shadow, had taken shape, and the emptiness he once felt was now filled with a growing anger. He didn't know exactly how to react, what to say, but he knew that something inside him had changed forever. His trust in Melissa, his belief in the love they had shared for so many years, was shattered. At dawn, he decided he needed to act. I couldn't continue pretending I didn't know anything, I couldn't bear the weight of doubt any longer. He picked up the phone and began planning his retaliation, but in a controlled, cold way. He wasn't the type of man to explode with anger without thinking, but Melissa's betrayal deserved a worthy response. He knew it wasn't enough to confront her directly, he needed to expose what had happened so that she felt the same humiliation he had felt. Unbeknownst to Melissa, he began gathering evidence. He captured the messages, the photos, any evidence that could be used against her. Every click on his cell phone was a painful reminder of what he had lost, but it was also a step towards his revenge. He wouldn't do anything rash. Not yet. He would wait for the right moment, the moment when Melissa was most vulnerable. Meanwhile, he watched her in silence, noticing every detail. She still smiled, pretended everything was fine, not knowing that the world around her was about to fall apart. Daniel, on the other hand, continued to act as usual, keeping his routine intact, but inside, everything was different. He knew what he needed to do. Weeks passed, and the tension between the two became unbearable. Daniel knew that Melissa was seeing her lover more frequently, but he didn't confront her right away. He was waiting for the right moment, the moment when he could make the biggest impact. His patience, although painful, was his best weapon. One night, Melissa said she had a work meeting and would be late. Daniel, already predicting what was really happening, smiled to himself. It was what he was waiting for. He knew where she would be, he knew who she would be with, and he decided that this would be the night that everything changed. He left the house, without saying anything, and drove to the place where Melissa and her lover used to meet. He parked the car at a distance, where he could see clearly without being seen. And there, he waited. Every minute that passed, the mix of anger and sadness consumed him, but he knew he needed to maintain control. I knew that what came next would be definitive. Finally, he saw them. Melissa was there, laughing, relaxed, as if nothing was wrong. The scene disgusted him. He knew he needed to act, but not here, not at that moment. Not yet. He took out his cell phone and started recording, capturing every movement, every gesture. The images would be more powerful than any words he could say. When he finished, he returned home before she returned. On the way, he felt a mixture of satisfaction and pain. Satisfaction at finally having control of the situation, but pain at knowing that the love he believed to be unshakable was dead. Hours later, Melissa arrived home, acting as if everything was normal. Daniel watched her every move, every attempt to hide what was happening. She smiled, but her eyes betrayed her discomfort. She knew, on some level, that something had changed, but she didn't yet understand how much. And then, the silence in the house was interrupted by the sound of a message on Daniel's cell phone. Melissa quickly looked at him, curious, but he didn't say anything. He just got up calmly and went to the room. That night, Daniel barely slept. He knew the moment was coming, the moment when the truth would be revealed. However, he wanted Melissa's humiliation to be public, for her to feel the same despair he felt upon discovering the betrayal. It was as if, now, his only purpose in life was to make her pay for what she had done. The next day, Daniel put his plan into action. He knew Melissa was in a vulnerable position, and decided this would be the perfect time to act. He took all the evidence he had collected, the messages, the photos, the videos, and, instead of confronting her directly, he began to release it in a subtle but devastating way. He started by sending the evidence to Melissa's closest friends, people with whom she shared her social life. The messages, the videos, everything was carefully forwarded, accompanied by a brief explanation: the truth always comes out. He knew that once this evidence was seen by these people, the news would spread like wildfire. And that was exactly what he wanted. The response was immediate. Within hours, Melissa began receiving messages and calls from confused friends, shocked by what they had seen. At first, she didn't understand what was happening, but as the messages piled up, panic began to take over her. When he finally understood what had been revealed, his world fell apart. The betrayal, which until then had been a secret hidden in the shadows, was now exposed for all to see. Melissa ran to Daniel, her face pale and her eyes wide with despair. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice shaking with fear and anger. Daniel, sitting calmly on the couch, watched her for a long moment before responding. "I only did what you made me do," he said coldly. "Now everyone knows who you really are." She was silent for a moment, trying to process his words. "You had no right to do that," she shouted, her voice taking on a tone of hysteria. This will destroy everything." Daniel stood up slowly, walking towards her with frightening calm. "Everything has already been destroyed, Melissa. You did this. I'm just showing the world what you did to me." She collapsed to the floor, sobbing, trying desperately to think of how to fix the situation. But there was no fix. Not now. Not after everything had already been exposed. And as she cried, broken, Daniel felt a strange sense of relief. He had finally gotten the truth out, and Melissa was facing the consequences of her choices. But as Melissa's public humiliation began to spread, Daniel realized that revenge hadn't brought him the peace he'd imagined. The emptiness inside him remained. And as he watched Melissa fall apart in front of him, he began to wonder if this was really what he wanted. And then, amid the heavy silence in the room, Daniel's cell phone vibrated once again. It was a message, but not from Melissa or her friends. It was a message from Melissa's lover. Daniel, curious, opened the phone and read the words on the screen. What he read left him immobile. The silence that followed the message seemed to echo through the house, creating an even thicker tension than before. Daniel stared at his cell phone, the words on the screen starting to stick in his mind. Melissa's lover, the one who until now was just a distant, faceless, nameless figure, had suddenly become real. And the words he had sent completely changed the course of what Daniel imagined would be his perfect revenge. "We need to talk. There's something you don't know." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't expect this. The control he believed he had over the situation seemed to be slowly slipping out of his hands. What could be so important that your wife's lover felt the need to send you a message? For a moment, Daniel thought about just ignoring it. After all, the damage had already been done. He had exposed Melissa, he had shown the world her betrayal. But at the same time, curiosity gnawed at him. He knew he needed to know what else was hidden behind this story. With a deep breath, he replied to the message. "What is it? Say what you want." His mind started working in 1,000 directions at once. What could he not know? Had Melissa told lies not only to him, but also to her lover? Could it be that there were more secrets buried in that relationship? While waiting for the answer, Daniel observed Melissa, who was still sitting on the living room floor, still trying to process the chaos he had unleashed. She couldn't stop crying, but there was something else in her eyes now. It wasn't just sadness or despair. It was fear. And that intrigued him. What else could be going on that he didn't know about? She had already betrayed his trust, but there was something in her expression that suggested there was more to come. Daniel's phone vibrated, interrupting his thoughts. It was the answer. He opened the message and read it slowly, his hands starting to shake as the words made sense. Melissa didn't tell everything. She wanted to keep it a secret, but I can't anymore. I'm going to reveal everything. Daniel's heart quickened, and he felt the anger and anxiety well up inside him again. What could be so devastating that even her lover, the man who helped her destroy her marriage, was now saying he needed to reveal more? He knew the betrayal had been a heavy blow, but the idea that there could be more secrets left him on the edge. He looked at Melissa, who was watching him silently. There was something in her eyes that made him realize that she, too, knew what was about to happen. She didn't ask what he was reading, and that only confirmed her suspicions. Melissa was scared of what would come next. "Daniel, please." She finally spoke, her voice shaky and weak. "I didn't want things to come to this." He didn't respond. The moral dilemma that affected him was complex and profound. What would he do with this new information? How far was he willing to go? There was, within him, a battle between the desire to end everything and the need to carry out his revenge. The betrayal had already been exposed, but now he felt he was about to discover something even darker. He just needed to decide if he wanted to listen. The phone vibrated once again. Daniel read the new message. "We'll meet tomorrow. I need to tell you face to face." The anger that had been burning inside him since the beginning of that discovery began to mix with a deep fear. What could be so serious that his wife's lover wanted to meet him in person? For the first time since it all started, Daniel didn't know if he was ready to hear the truth. He got up slowly, without saying a word to Melissa, and went to his room. He needed time to think, to prepare himself for what came next. Whatever it was, I knew it would change everything. The betrayal, which once seemed like the final blow, now became just the beginning of something bigger. Something he wasn't ready to face. Lying in bed, Daniel stared at the ceiling, trying to organize his thoughts. For the first time, he felt lost, not knowing how to proceed. The feeling of justice that had guided him until that moment was now overshadowed by doubts. What else would he discover? And, above all, what would you do with this new truth? The moral dilemma weighed on him like never before. The initial anger gave way to suffocating anguish, as if the ground were opening up beneath his feet. Melissa had already destroyed what they had, but what if the truth that was about to be revealed was even more devastating? Daniel didn't know if he would be able to bear it. The next day, Daniel woke up with a heavy feeling in his chest. He knew that meeting Melissa's lover would bring a truth impossible to ignore, something that would transform his anger and thirst for revenge into something deeper. He prepared to leave the house without exchanging many words with Melissa. She, visibly distressed, did not try to stop him. It was clear that she also knew what was coming and that, in some way, she feared what would be revealed. The cafe where they arranged to meet was discreet, almost empty. Daniel arrived first, his thoughts swirling around the last message he had received. He tried to imagine what could be so serious that his lover wanted to reveal everything in person. When the man finally entered, Daniel recognized him immediately, not from photos or descriptions, but from the overwhelming feeling of betrayal that emanated from his presence. They sat down, and the silence between them was almost unbearable. The nervous lover began to speak slowly. "I'm not here to justify myself, Daniel. I know what I did was wrong. What you and Melissa had, should never have been destroyed like this." He took a deep breath. "But there's something you don't know. Something Melissa tried to hide from you, and if I don't tell you, you'll never know." Daniel was silent, waiting for him to get to the point. "The truth is that Melissa didn't just betray me with words and caresses. She was desperate for something you may never have realized. And that something was money. She got involved with me not just out of desire, but because she needed help. What you don't know is that she got into debt, a lot of debt, with dangerous people. And now you're involved in this too." Daniel felt his blood run cold. Money? Debts? That explained the change in Melissa's behavior, the constant departures, the silent concerns he had ignored. She wasn't just cheating on her love, he was putting their lives at risk. "What do you mean by dangerous people?" Daniel asked, his voice tense. She made some deals, and those deals didn't work out. I tried to help her, but it's too late. These people are coming after her. And if you don't do something now, they'll come after you too. Daniel felt the weight of the situation fall on his shoulders. Everything he thought he knew about his life, about his marriage, was falling apart in ways he never could have imagined. Melissa's betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was a time bomb that could explode at any moment. Upon leaving the cafe, Daniel realized that his life, already destroyed by betrayal, was now at a point of no return. He could no longer think of revenge, he needed to find a way to deal with the consequences of Melissa's actions, not just for his own sake, but for his own survival. He returned home, where Melissa was waiting for him, her face pale and tense. "You knew this was going to happen, didn't you?" Daniel asked, getting directly into the topic. Melissa nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. "I didn't want to involve you, Daniel. I tried to resolve it myself, but I lost control." He stared at her, feeling a mix of anger, disappointment and sadness. "You destroyed everything. Not just our marriage, but our lives." "I know," she murmured, breaking down into sobs. "I know I did everything wrong, but, please help me. I can't do this alone." Daniel was silent for a long time, looking at the woman he had loved for so many years, now reduced to someone he barely recognized. He knew he had reached the point where he would need to make a decision. Continuing with Melissa meant diving even deeper into the chaos she had created. And despite all the pain, he knew he couldn't save her. She had chosen that path, and he could no longer follow her. "I can't help you, Melissa," he said finally. "I've loved you for a long time. But now, I need to save myself." Melissa sobbed louder, but Daniel, for the first time, felt at peace with his decision. He left her there, sitting, while he walked out the door, determined to rebuild his life, away from the lies, the betrayals and the shadows that Melissa had brought into the house. In the months that followed, Daniel started again. He cut all ties with Melissa and dealt with the consequences of the debts she had left behind, but with the help of a lawyer, he managed to protect what was left of his financial life. Melissa, on the other hand, was consumed by her own choices. The public shame and constant fear of those who held her accountable left her isolated and lost. Daniel never looked back. He knew that the love he had once shared with Melissa was buried beneath the lies and betrayals, and that his only choice now was to move on. This story showed how betrayal can destroy lives and leave deep scars. Comment what you thought of this journey and share your opinion in the comments. If you are not yet a subscriber, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new impactful stories like this. Remember, the channel does not support any type of betrayal or disrespect in relationships. Thanks for following along this far.